You know how moms are, they are unpredictable. Some days she'll say hi to me, other days she'll wave while tending to the 50 people calling her for work that day, and on some days she'll just walk up to me with no warning at all and stare at me intently. And the first words come out of her mouth would be, "Claudia, do you love me?" And with half a bagel stuffed in my mouth and bags under my eyes, I'd nod hesitantly and say, "Yes?" I mean, who asked that deep of a question at 8 a.m. in the morning? It's way too early for that. But it wouldn't end there. Then she would walk even closer and she'd say, "No, no, are you sure you love me?" And I'll be honest, on bad days, I straight up say no. But most days, I reassure her by saying 100 times yes. And these countless exchanges of I love yous pretty much sum up my relationship with my mom. Growing up, I've always looked up to my mom. She's always been the brave one in the family, but she didn't just gain this trait overnight. In 2013, she was diagnosed with a deadly autoimmune disease that forever changed our life, but I was a first-hand witness in seeing her overcome this illness. After she was introduced to medicine that helped her heal, everything in my family seemed perfectly fine until it wasn't. In December of 2019, my mom began to experience extreme feelings of nausea and dizziness, to the point where whenever she came up to hug me, she would immediately start feeling her body tremble. And to be honest, I didn't think that much of it. I thought maybe she was just acting this way because it was that time of the month, if you know what I mean. Or maybe it was my brother, constantly yelling at his friends on Fortnite that caused her to have headaches. Or maybe it was just because she was a mom, and moms always have two sides. They have their pure, loving, and kind side, and then they have their I will murder you if you take one step closer to me side. Whatever it was, I definitely did not expect it to be the sole reason why she would have to move out of the house. Until one day, being the sneaky child I was, I eavesdropped on a conversation between my mom and my aunt. And my mom was explaining to my aunt that she was having trouble sleeping that night. And then when she woke up, she felt like she couldn't move. She felt paralyzed. And it was at that moment that I realized that my mom wasn't joking when she said that the reason for why her health was deteriorating was because of mold. And I know you're looking at me like, "Claudia, did you just say mold, like the mold that you find in old greasy sandwiches?" Yes, I did, and trust me, I thought my mom was crazy and insane in every way too. But because I wasn't experiencing the same symptoms as her, empathizing with her was definitely a challenge. She had to explain to me that the mold in our house was causing mycotoxins, or harmful bacteria, to roam around in the air, causing her autoimmune disease to act up. To put it simply, she said that she felt like she was Superman, and molds were kryptonite. Whenever she came into contact with it, she'd immediately start feeling her heart begin to race, and she felt like she couldn't breathe at times. And that was her sign that she needed to get out of the house, away from the toxins that were slowly killing her. So she stayed at her friend's house for 3 months, and during this time, I only saw her when she picked me up from school and dropped me off at home. Normally, she would open the garage, we'd walk inside, and I would tell her all about how my day went. But as we stood on the doorstep, I would reach out to embrace her once again before she left, and she would reluctantly take a step back. And it was a painful reminder that she couldn't even hug me, because my clothes were infected with the very thing that was harming her. My clothes were infected with mold, and she could sense it. Living without my mom for 3 months felt like an eternity, especially because the only people I could really talk to were my dad and my brother, and they were really no help when it came to girl problems. But we eventually came to the conclusion that living apart from each other was harder than expected, so we searched for a rental home. And I was super excited because in just a couple of months, I'd be able to live with my family again. But this excitement I once held quickly drained from my body as my mom sat down with me and she said, "We can all live together on one condition. We'd have to give away everything we owned. We'd have to donate everything from clothes, backpack, furniture, piano, you name it. Anything that existed in the old house, we'd have to completely sever all ties with because it was infected with mold." And so she asked the question again. She said, "Claudia, do you love me enough to sacrifice everything?" Now, of course, I love my mom enough to sacrifice everything. I couldn't say no, but that didn't take away from the fact that following through with this wouldn't be easy. I remember I tried to practically beg my mom to let me keep certain items, and I'm not talking about the random binder of Pokemon cards that my brother and I would obsessively fill up, or the miniature flip recorder that housed all of my moments of when I used to be a pop star, my 9-year-old Taylor Swift karaoke sessions. I'm talking about the sentimental items, the ones that had value. Not saying that those didn't. The painting I received in 7th grade from one of my closest friends that had a picture of a piano with a rose on top of it. My very first camera I got to foster my passion for journalism, the Polaroid that had my friends on it from our very first homecoming. These were all items that held sentimental value to me, and it seemed as if my mom couldn't understand that. But it seemed as if my mom couldn't understand that, and that is what annoyed me. When it comes to reflection, I've always thought of it as a solitary act, one that only involved me and my own actions, but I realized that true reflection broadens perspective and in turn can be used as a tool for bridging divides. My dad was very expressive about his frustration, a lot more than I was, but despite the constant chaos that was happening in my family, there was one item that I held onto, and that was my bullet journal. Within this journal, it housed my endless to-do lists, goals, ambitions, and memories, but it was also my place for reflection. Within its pages, I would reflect on not only myself, but the people around me. Seeing other people's ways of thinking allowed me to view situations with an open mind rather than a narrow mind. It allowed me to pick apart everyone's words one by one to truly understand what they were trying to convey. It allowed me to pause and stop thinking about myself and instead take the time to empathize with others. Using my journal, I realized that my mom was probably frustrated because it seemed as if everyone in my family was turning against her and choosing material belongings over her own health. But to the rest of my family, it seemed as if my mom couldn't understand how hard it would be to simply drop everything and move. But the concept of reflection isn't new to me. It's always been a huge part of my life. I remember in 2nd grade, I had a diary with a big pink sparkly C in the front from Justice, and yes, it had a lock because my diary held the top secret info that happened all around school. But as I grew older, my perception of reflection changed. It was no longer, what was the juicy gossip? Did Christian ever ask Megan out on the playground? Why did that random girl tattletale on me? And why did my brother just tell my crush that I had a huge obsession with Justin Bieber? Oh my God. As I grew older, reflection evolved into a challenge. Why was it a challenge? Why was jotting down the events that happened during the day so simple yet so difficult? And it's because reflecting means admitting. It means being vulnerable because putting words down on paper made them true, and I didn't want to accept that reality. I wanted to avoid the inner turmoil I was experiencing, watching my family slowly fall apart. My dad and I thought that my mom couldn't understand how hard it would be to simply let everything go, but with time, we understood how the whole situation looked from her perspective. I used my journal to help empathize with and communicate both perspectives so that we could find a compromise, a middle ground. I knew that my mom wanted to do everything in her power to remove the mold from our house, even if it meant detaching herself from material items, even if it meant starting over with nothing. But there's always something that comes out of nothing, right? And that something was our unconditional love. I needed my journal to help me understand my mom well enough to become the diplomat in the family. Every sentence I wrote allowed me to break down the barriers that caused me to only think about myself. Every word I wrote allowed me to understand that standing right in front of me was this unconditional love that would mend my family's broken pieces together. But most importantly, we needed this so that we could find a middle ground. Those days where my dad and I would have no conversations about mold and I'd hear no arguments were the days that I cherished because it seemed as if everything in my family was perfectly fine. But I realized that the only time I really opened my journal was at the times where I couldn't quite put a finger on all of the emotions I was experiencing. It was those moments where I felt broken, battered, and bruised that I picked up a pencil and began writing. It was those moments where I felt confused and uncomfortable with all the arguments I'd heard that I ran straight to those blank pages and filled every square inch. Because reflection is the first step to rebuilding what was once broken. The relationships in my family weren't the same anymore, as chaos erupted every day, and we seemed to be straying further and further from seeing eye to eye. But I realized that what helped us see eye to eye was reflecting to find those missing pieces, those missing perspectives that I wouldn't have been able to understand before. It guided me through the process of empathizing so that I could help bridge the divides between my family and, in turn, help them find the middle ground.